In 2008, MySpace was the most visited website in the United States. More traffic than Google, more page views than Yahoo. 100 million registered users logging in every single day to customize their profiles, autoplay their favorite songs, and broadcast their inner lives to anyone willing to click. At its peak, MySpace was generating over $800 million a year in revenue. News Corporation, Rupert Murdoch's global media empire, had paid $580 million for it just 3 years earlier, and Wall Street analysts were lining up to call it the deal of the decade. Cover stories, keynote speeches, the kind of breathless consensus that, in hindsight, is almost always a warning sign. 2 years later, it was gone. Not bankrupt, not acquired at a loss, just gone, hollowed out, irrelevant. A ghost town of abandoned profiles and broken image links, while a site launched by a Harvard dropout in a dorm room had eaten its entire world alive.
The servers were still running, the profiles were still there, but the people had left. Quietly, without announcement, one by one, until the silence was deafening. But here's the part that most people get wrong. MySpace didn't lose to Facebook because Facebook was better. MySpace lost because of a single boardroom decision made in Santa Monica in 2006. A decision that its own engineers warned would destroy the platform. A decision that prioritized advertising revenue over every single user who had ever logged on. And by the time anyone understood what had happened, it was already too late to fix. The machine had been reprogrammed, and it was eating itself. This is the story of how the biggest website in America vanished in 2 years. And it starts not with Facebook, not with Rupert Murdoch, but with two guys in a low-ceilinged office park in West Los Angeles who built something no one had ever seen before, and then made every wrong choice possible with it.
Tom Anderson and Chris DeWolf launched MySpace in August 2003, out of a building on Lincoln Boulevard in Santa Monica, California. Anderson, the guy who became every new user's automatic first friend, the smiling face leaning against a whiteboard, was a musician and programmer who understood viscerally what teenagers and young adults actually wanted from the internet. He had studied English literature at Berkeley, taught himself to code, and had been arrested at 19 for hacking into a bank system as part of a group of phone phreakers. He understood the internet as a place for self-expression before anyone had that language for it. DeWolf was the businessman, the closer, the one who understood monetization, partnerships, and the language of advertising. Together, they built something that felt genuinely revolutionary. You could design your own page, change the fonts, the background color, embed an MP3 that played the moment someone landed on your profile.
You could post photos, write blog entries, link to your friends, leave comments on their pages. In 2003, the dominant internet experience was static. You consumed. MySpace made you a creator, a publisher, a broadcaster with a potential audience of millions. The platform grew at a speed that even its founders hadn't anticipated. By early 2004, MySpace had 1 million registered users. By the end of that year, 5 million. By mid-2005, the number had crossed 20 million, and it was accelerating. The servers were straining under load. The codebase was a cascading mess. Engineers had bolted feature after feature onto architecture that was never designed to scale to this size. Wires crossed on wires, patches on patches. On a busy Friday night, the site would groan and stutter, pages taking 8 or 10 seconds to load on a broadband connection. But none of that mattered to the users because nothing else like it existed. Every band trying to get heard, every aspiring photographer, every high school junior who wanted to be seen, they were all there, all building profiles, all chasing the same digital visibility. MySpace wasn't just a website, it was a cultural institution. It was where you found out who you were. And then Rupert Murdoch arrived. In July 2005, News Corporation acquired Intermix Media, the parent company of MySpace, for $580 million in cash. It was the largest acquisition in the history of social media at that point. Murdoch flew to Los Angeles, shook hands, spoke about convergence between old media and new media, and the press treated it like a coronation. Fox News, The New York Post, HarperCollins, The Times of London, and now MySpace. The narrative wrote itself. The man who had spent 4 decades outmaneuvering competitors on every continent had finally conquered the internet. Fortune magazine put Murdoch on its cover. Analysts revised their price targets. The deal was supposed to prove that traditional media empires could adapt, absorb, and thrive in the digital age. What it actually signaled was the beginning of the end. Not immediately, not visibly, but structurally, irreversibly. Because the moment News Corporation took ownership, the fundamental nature of MySpace changed in ways that were invisible to the 100 million people logging in every day, and catastrophic in their eventual consequences. Tom Anderson and Chris DeWolf stayed on, DeWolf as CEO, Anderson as president, but a new layer of corporate oversight descended on the Santa Monica office. Executives with backgrounds in broadcast television and newspaper advertising now sat in on product meetings. Quarterly revenue targets appeared on whiteboards next to engineering roadmaps. The vocabulary of the company shifted. Users became eyeballs. Profiles became inventory. The platform that had been built around the question of what people want became a platform organized around the question of what advertisers will pay for. The critical moment came in the summer of 2006. Google, then generating billions in search advertising and hungry to expand into display, approached News Corporation with an extraordinary offer. Google would pay $900 million over 3 years, guaranteed, in exchange for the exclusive right to serve search and display advertising across MySpace. $900 million. For News Corp's finance team, this was not a difficult conversation. They had paid $580 million for the entire company. Google was now offering to pay back nearly twice that in advertising revenue, in cash, over 36 months. The deal closed in August 2006. The press called it another masterstroke. The engineers at MySpace, the people who actually understood what the platform was and how it worked, knew exactly what it meant. The contract with Google included specific page view minimums. If MySpace failed to deliver the guaranteed volume of pages served, and therefore the guaranteed volume of ad impressions, the financial terms of the deal would change. This was not a minor contractual detail. This was a leash. It meant MySpace could not restructure its navigation, could not consolidate pages, could not make the kind of deep product changes that would improve user experience if those changes reduced page count. It meant that the product roadmap, every feature, every redesign, every architectural decision, now had to be evaluated through a single lens. Does this maintain or increase page views? Not does this make the product better. Not does this earn user trust. Page views. The consequences cascaded through every corner of the product. MySpace multiplied the number of clicks required to complete basic actions. Sending a message, updating a profile, searching for a friend. Because more clicks meant more pages, and more pages meant more ad impressions. They flooded the interface with advertising units that grew progressively more intrusive. Banners that expanded on hover, video ads that triggered without warning, interstitials that blocked content until a timer expired. They opened the platform to third-party widgets and embed codes with almost no quality control, which meant that individual user profiles became chaotic collision zones of animated GIFs, autoplay music players, glittering cursor trails, and background images rendered in colors that made overlaid text physically unreadable. By 2007, loading a typical MySpace profile on a standard home broadband connection took anywhere from 12 to 20 seconds. On a laptop with multiple tabs open, it could crash the browser entirely. The engineers who had been there from the beginning watched this happen with a particular kind of institutional dread. The feeling of people who can see exactly what is wrong and have no organizational authority to fix it. They had already been raising alarms about the underlying infrastructure, a system that had been scaled by emergency rather than by design. Now, instead of being given the resources and mandate to rebuild the foundation, they were being asked to pour more concrete on top of a structure that was already cracking beneath the weight. Senior engineers left. Their institutional knowledge walked out with them. The people who replaced them inherited systems they hadn't built and documentation that was incomplete. Meanwhile, 40 miles south in Palo Alto, Facebook was making the exact opposite decision at every turn.
Mark Zuckerberg had launched Facebook from his Kirkland House dorm room in Harvard in February 2004, just months after MySpace, but with a philosophy that was almost a mirror image in its priorities. Where MySpace gave users complete creative freedom, Facebook imposed uniformity. Every profile was the same layout: clean, white, spare. You couldn't change the background. You couldn't embed a song that played automatically. You couldn't animate your cursor. To MySpace users who had spent hours customizing their pages, this looked like poverty of vision. Why would you use a website that wouldn't let you express yourself? But that enforced simplicity was the product, because Facebook's architecture loaded in 2 seconds, not 15. It didn't crash your browser. It worked on a laptop with a weak wireless signal in a college library at midnight. And the social signal was clean. You read what people wrote, not what font they had chosen.
When Facebook initially required a .edu email address to register, it created a layer of social exclusivity that gave it cultural cachet on college campuses that MySpace, open to anyone, had never been able to cultivate. By the time Facebook dropped the college restriction and opened to everyone in September 2006, the same month the Google advertising deal closed at MySpace, it wasn't entering MySpace's market. It was preparing to absorb it entirely. The migration happened faster than any analyst had modeled. In January 2008, MySpace still had a meaningful traffic lead in the United States. By April 2008, Facebook had surpassed MySpace in global unique monthly visitors. The crossover looked like a cliff on a chart, not a gradual slope. Users weren't drifting away. They were making a conscious decision, opening a Facebook account, experiencing a product that felt like a relief by comparison, and never going back. The average MySpace session time, which had been over 30 minutes in 2007, fell to under 10 minutes by late 2009. Some months it fell further. The advertisers, who follow attention with the loyalty of a tracking algorithm, followed the users. Revenue that had looked structurally secure began to evaporate. The Google deal, which had seemed like a guarantee, now looked like a contract that had locked MySpace into optimizing for a metric that was in freefall. News Corp's response was a sequence of management decisions that, examined in sequence, suggest an organization that had completely lost its ability to understand what it owned or what it needed. In April 2009, they removed Chris DeWolf as CEO. His replacement was Owen Van Natta, a former Facebook executive which carried an almost theatrical irony. But Van Natta lasted less than a year before he too was gone.
He was replaced by a co-CEO structure, Jason Hirschhorn and Mike Jones, sharing oversight of a platform that was, by that point, experiencing double-digit monthly user decline. The leadership churn alone was devastating. Every new executive arrived with a new thesis about what MySpace needed to be: a music platform, an entertainment hub, a social discovery engine, a competitor to YouTube. Each pivot consumed resources, disrupted the engineering team, and failed to address the underlying reality, which was that the social graph, the web of connections between users, had already migrated. You cannot rebuild a social network from scratch once the relationships have moved somewhere else. The value of a social platform is entirely in the people on it, and the people were gone. In June 2011, News Corporation sold MySpace to Specific Media Group and the entertainer Justin Timberlake for $35 million. $35 million. Against the $580 million they had paid in 2005. Against the $900 million generated through the Google deal alone. The arithmetic of the destruction, when you account for all capital invested, all operational costs, and the opportunity cost of what a well-managed MySpace could have become, runs comfortably into the billions of dollars. It was one of the most complete destructions of enterprise value in the history of the technology industry. Timberlake's involvement generated headlines and a brief surge of nostalgic curiosity. The redesigned MySpace, cleaner, oriented around music and entertainment, launched in 2013. It was, by many accounts, a genuinely better product than what MySpace had become in its final News Corp years. But it didn't matter. The users who had grown up on the platform were embedded in Facebook's ecosystem, their social graphs intact, their habits calcified. You cannot reactivate a social network by improving the product after the network has dissolved. The warmth is gone. The rooms are empty. There is a detail from the final years of MySpace that surfaces in accounts from former engineers and product managers, and it stays with you. In 2009, when the platform was losing hundreds of thousands of users a month, and executives were cycling through the Santa Monica office like a revolving door, MySpace still hosted a music library of over 14 million songs. Independent artists, unsigned bands, musicians from every genre and every corner of the country had uploaded their catalogs to MySpace because it had been, for several years, the only place on the internet where music and community lived in the same space. You could discover a band from Tulsa, leave a comment on their page, and share their song to your profile in the same 30 seconds. That was genuinely powerful. That library, 14 million songs, an archive of an entire era of independent music, eventually began to degrade as investment dried up. Links broke, files corrupted. When MySpace servers were migrated in 2019, up to 50 million audio files dating from 2003 to 2015 were lost. The company said it was an unintentional byproduct of a server migration project. The musicians who lost their archives described it differently. The engineers who built the platform had seen it coming. The users who built their digital lives on it had trusted it absolutely. And the executives who inherited it had treated it like a billboard on a highway, something to plaster with advertising units and collect guaranteed revenue from until the contract expired. The lesson of MySpace is not that social media is inherently fickle, or that technology moves too fast for any company to keep pace, or that startups become unrecognizable after acquisition. Those are comfortable explanations that let the people responsible off the hook. The real lesson is more specific and more brutal. The moment a platform stops being built for the people using it and starts being run for the people monetizing it, a countdown begins. The users always figure it out. Not through analysis, not through press releases. Through the experience of using something that used to feel good and now doesn't. They don't write op-eds, they don't send complaint letters. They open a new tab, try the other thing, and don't come back. They leave you with 14 million songs and no one left to hear them. If stories about how companies built from genuine passion get turned into empty shells by people who should have known better, if that's what keeps you up at night, this channel is where that reckoning happens. Subscribe, because the next one is already worse than this.